This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, an international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Rob Lawrence. In this new series, I talk to coaches, leaders and experts who share their passion for this incredible profession and their knowledge of how to do marketing well. Our ambition is to contribute to the development of the coaching profession and to bring you some new ideas, insights and strategies so you can create an impact with your coaching and marketing. My guest today is somebody who is fascinated with the philosophy of productivity and is no stranger to coaching or marketing. He's the founder and mastermind behind the widely read and respected planning and productivity blog and website, productiveflourishing.com. Having written several books, including Start Finishing, How to Go From Idea to Done, and also as the creator of an app designed to help you keep momentum, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you on the podcast today, Charlie Gilkey. Charlie, a very warm welcome.
Rob, thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be in conversation with you.
And you too, Charlie. So I'd love to introduce you to our listener and get a little bit of your background and backstory. But before we go there, the theme of this series is make time for marketing. I'd love to get a bit of a sense of what does marketing mean to you, Charlie?
So a few things. I think let's start with the difference between marketing and sales. And I want to start there. That seems like a not obvious place to start, but I think those get conflated together, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want to distinguish those. So broadly speaking, I'll give the business answer to it, is marketing is the general and broadcast messaging that you do to make people aware of your product, brands, or services, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really, normally we think mass. We think a lot of people at the same time when it comes to marketing. Sales are the specific invitations and offers that you make to specific people to buy a thing, right? And unfortunately, especially in a digital marketing space, we conflate those two, but those are two separate activities. And when we start with marketing, there are so many different ways we can go about this. Like, we don't have to be the ShamWow guy, right? We don't have to be super sleazy about it. We can be authentic, genuine. We can tell stories if that's your jam. You can give stats if that's your jam. You can be relatable. And so I think part of the challenge people have, and especially coaches have with marketing, is they think there's one way you got to do it, and there's not. There's not one way you have to coach. There's not one way you have to market. But functionally speaking, it's really about building that awareness and interest and desire in what you're selling, which is separate than actually selling it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, and it's lovely to hear that. And I really appreciate that distinction too, because we have had some feedback during the series actually from listeners that they wonder if we're crossing over a little bit too much and going into the sales space a little bit. And like you, they are very closely related. And I agree with you. I think there's a lot of blurriness between where the boundaries are, particularly in the digital space. So I'm really grateful for you addressing that point and clearing that up a little bit to help us understand what we're talking about here when we're talking about marketing. So we'll come back to marketing a little bit later on, Charlie, if we may. I know you're a bit of a powerhouse when it comes to the productivity side of things. From my own first-hand experience, by the way, as a close follower of yours, and also just seeing all the wonderful work that you do out there, and you're pretty prolific by most people's standards, I would say. So I'm curious to know, and just to kind of give our listener a bit more of a sense of who you are, because it may be the first time that they've heard of Charlie Gilkey, just a little bit more of your backstory and how you got into what it is that you do today and all the wonderful stuff that you do, and how you have found this world of sort of productivity and efficiency and what it is about that world that fascinates you.
Yeah, so I'll start with the quick version of the origin story. So around 2006, 2007, I was simultaneously working towards my Ph.D. in philosophy. So I'm a social philosopher and ethicist by training, but I was also pursuing my career in the Army. So I was an Army Joint Forces military coordinator, which made sure that the Army, Air Force, Navy, and our partners were all on the same sheet of music. And I had recently come home from Operation Iraqi Freedom, and I was sort of struck by this annoyance. And the annoyance was, on the one hand, I could move and orchestrate like a lot of people moving and a lot of equipment all over the terrain and all over the world. But this 5,000 word essay is kicking my butt. Like, how does this make sense?
Yeah.
What is going on here? And so I started to sort of unpack that, because it's like, it's not that I'm incompetent. It's not that I'm not intelligent.
Yeah.
It's something is missing here. And so it really, I had that curiosity about it. And so I did like any good officer or scholar would do. I'm like, you know what? I'm not the only person with this problem, right? I'm not unique in this sort of thing. So what have other people figured out? And as I started reading through the works at the time, the Getting Things Done and, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and the Powerful Engagement, I can go down, but, there's been a body of literature. But what I found is I kept having to translate it to make it make sense for the creative knowledge working context that I was in, right? So some of those are great for managers, some of those are great for executives, but at the time, largely speaking, it was me having to balance being a maker and a manager at the same time and just a lot of different things. And so that is of what eventually became Productive Flourishing. And what I found I can say it more clearly now because it turns out after, 12, 15 years of doing something, you could speak about it more clearly. Like what I found was that most of our struggles as creative people fell in the messy middle of projects. Right. The productivity literature at the time was far too granular and tactical and sometimes just inane, like 17 ways to hack a shoebox. No one cares. Right.
Yeah.
And the personal development literature was too high level, vision, values, where you want your life to be, but no real relationship between those. And so I started really pushing, like, how do we get projects, and especially the ones that matter, on our schedule and get them done? Right? How do we really focus and finish what matters most? And that's what became Productive Flourishing. That's what ended up infusing Start Finishing, right? And that's just really where my work comes from. So, and I have a very tense relationship with productivity, especially the industry. It's far too hustle bro. It's far too, crush the world. It's far too there are pieces of it that I just want to walk away from a lot.
Yeah.
But I'm also like, you know what? There's this other side, though. There's this other side of conscious productivity, of conscious execution, where we really are really concerned about doing good in the world. We're really concerned about doing better for ourselves. And we don't have to bake in the overwork and the over-efforting and the burnout and the struggle.
Yeah.
And valorize that. Yeah. And so so when people are like, you're a productivity expert, I'm like, I got to qualify that, because if you expect, like a lot of people, Rob, come to me and they're like, I want to do more. Tell me how to do more. And the first thing I'll say is like, maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Maybe we should be inverting this and say, what's the critical stuff?
Right.
That we need to happen. And luckily, there have been plenty of people that are taking that one between Greg McKeown and essentialism, some of what we've created in minimalism. So there is this counter approach, but at the time, and it still pops up, I'm like, we got to get out of this hustle bro, crush it, like work is the only thing that matters and everything else. Like, I got to walk away from that.
Yeah. To your point there, Charlie, my gut feel is, based on the conversations I have with many coaches and the folks I've been talking to around this podcast, they will almost certainly relate with what you're saying there, because I think their philosophy is a slightly different one to a lot of the folks that are out there in the digital space and sort of the new business entrepreneurship space as well, particularly online. I completely relate with what you're saying there. So that's a really interesting insight as well. It's not about just trying to do more and more and more, which is where the overwhelm can come in and the burnout can come in, as you say. It's getting that focus and getting back to basics and figuring out what's really important here and how do I execute on that. So with that in mind, what I do see, and again, I'm sort of partly reflecting on my own experience here, starting can sometimes be quite easy because we've got the energy and the excitement of starting out. And that might be a marketing campaign, that might be a new service or product that we're working on. But there then comes a point where the gradient gets a little bit higher, and then we sort of start to slow down. So from all of your experience, I'm curious to learn, what is it? What are the main things that hold people back? And perhaps more importantly, what can we do about those things that hold us back?
Yeah, so these are what I call the 5 elements of the air sandwich. So let's take the top level vision, values, mission, sort of life purpose thing, and consider that the top layer of bread, right?
Yeah.
And then let's look at your day-to-day reality and your task and your schedule as the lower layer of bread. And for a lot of people, there's a lot of air between those two slices of bread, right? How our days are and what we want our life to be often diverge quite considerably.
Right.
But that's actually an illusion because there are 5 core things that are in between there, right? So you have competing priorities. Mm-hmm. You have head trash. You have no realistic plan. You have too few resources, and you have poor team alignment. And by team, I mean the people around you, like could be family, could be neighbors. It's not just your business team. But those 5 things end up becoming the core challenges that keep us from doing our best work, that keeps us from really finishing these projects. So to your point, why bright, shiny object projects are so fun and exciting in the beginning and easy to start is, well, you haven't really had competing priorities yet, right? And if it's ideas are free, like there's no friction to them. The reality hasn't intruded yet to say, well, but what about these other things? And so that's one of the things that we do. We're like, oh, I got this new project. I'm going to start it, forgetting that we started 3 projects last week and 4 projects the week before and 5 projects that we still haven't done. Right. And then we're like, oh, crap, I started a thing, but then this other thing has come up. So we end up in a place where competing priorities really do start doing a lot of work. And so that's just one of my go-tos when people are like, I'm struggling. I'm like, well, what are your competing priorities here? And part of it is people's reluctance to acknowledge their actual real priorities. We might need to come back to that. The second one that I go to is head trash. And head trash is just all of the negative stuff and stories that we accumulate from our society. Sometimes we get in family of origin. Sometimes we tell it to ourselves that just keep us from it. It just keeps us from being our best selves and showing up that way. And so if at the very deep core, you believe that you're not good enough, well, turns out when you start doing a project that's difficult, that head trash is going to come up and start to needle at you. And like, maybe this wasn't for you. And maybe you chose wrong. Or, oh, Rob, you're terrible at planning. Here you go again. Like whatever that is. Or you're terrible at focusing. Here you go again. All that sort of head trash gets in the way and creates a sort of cognitive, emotional, and social noise that keeps you from being able to focus. Those are my 2 go-to places to go when I start with things that's different than most people's places to start. Most people, when they hear those 5 things, they're like, oh, it's too few resources. Like if I just had more time and if I just had more money or if I had that one influencer who would just pay attention to me, then life would be grand. Turns out, no, right? That's projects and what you would do, just the pressure on them increases if you don't have some of these other pieces in place. So I start with those 2 when people are really like wondering what's going on with their productivity. And a key thing that, especially when I'm talking about productivity, is I want us to start from the position that perhaps, Rob, we're not uniquely defective. Perhaps we're not fundamentally broken. Perhaps we're not wired to always not be able to get our shit together, right? Yeah. And if we stop those assumptions and we let that head trash go, then we can see that everything we're engaged with, like it opens up the world of possibility. It turns challenges and setbacks into learning opportunities. Like it just changes the game. But we have to start from that approach, because if you start things from the perspective that you're not enough, you're not good enough, you can't get right, midway into that project, all of those are going to be what creates what I call a thrash crash, where you're just thrashing we all know what it is. It's that meta work around a project or task where it's not really pushing it forward, but you seem to be doing a lot around it. It's that emotional agita, the stories, the commiserating, the complaining, the, messing around with Notion because you don't want to engage with the task. Like different people thrash differently, but at a certain point, if you have too much competing priorities and too much head trash, you're going to end up in a thrash crash, which only feeds those stories over and over again about not being able to get right. So this is where, again, one of the reasons I ask people to really think about what they committed to is because the more things you commit to, the more likely you're going to run into a competing priorities scenario. Yeah. The more likely you're not going to have enough resources to get it done. Yeah. And the more likely you're going to get poor team alignment. So you're creating the very set of circumstances that you don't want.
Got it. It's really interesting hearing it in that way. And something you remind me of there in the marketing context, and this is true for anything, but I often see it and experience it myself in the marketing context, is how much when we execute on our marketing, it is a self-growth tool, and how much it reflects back to us, to your point there, the stuff that we perhaps need to work on elsewhere. So there's a really great reminder, I feel, there in what you were saying there about the head trash and the competing priorities. How much of this is the inner work, and working on that stuff can really help us with the other more external output stuff, such as our marketing. What I find really useful there about what you were saying is the things to look for. So some of those signs there that you described, I would say now with some awareness, you would be able to spot and then be able to kind of go, okay, this isn't about the marketing campaign. Maybe this is about me, or something that I need to kind of,
Yeah. Look, I've worked with so many people because I'm an executive and business coach, and they'll be doing a marketing campaign and they're like, hey, Charlie, it's not working. And I've done this long enough to be like, you know what? I won't say it this way, but I'll think, their facial expressions are saying that they don't want this to work.
Yeah.
They've created some sort of no-win scenario for themselves. And so what is that no-win scenario? And so it's like the first question is like, well, that's interesting. Like, do you want it to work? And they're like, of course I want it to work. And I'm like, really? Yeah. Right. So the question there becomes like, what do you believe you'll have to give up that matters to you to achieve this level of this thing that you're going after? And usually that's where the no-win scenario comes up. So like, oh, well, if I'm successful with this launch of these group programs, then like it's going to eat up all my time and I'm not going to be able to be with my kids. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Because you've made success cost you something you don't want to give up, right? And so in that scenario, it's like, the most reasonable response for people is to aim for like a mediocrity to it, right? Because mediocrity is safe, right? Mediocre is safe because like, you don't want to fail, right? No one wants to fail.
Yeah.
You get called out for that. And at a certain point, when you start talking about poor team alignment and boundaries, things like that, success actually can create some disequilibrium in relationships. Things have to change. And so people will start nicking at you and you'll end up with some conversations, or at least that's the story people tell. Right. So no one gets mad at you for being mediocre, right? You don't have to really have any courageous conversations. You don't have to give yourself permission to do things. You don't have to stand tall. And so there's this sort of safety that happens in that. And a lot of people don't know they're doing it. Mm-hmm. But when you look at sort of their marketing campaigns, that's what it comes. And so, I'm glad you mentioned that. I say in Start Finishing, and a lot of what we're talking about is actually in Start Finishing. But, I just remind people that really what I call best work projects are bridges and mirrors. They're bridges and mirrors. They're mirrors because they reflect what's going on in your internal landscape and what's going on in your world. So if you commit to that new big project and then realize, oh crap, how am I going to get this done? What that project is mirroring you is there's no space in your schedule for this type of thing. Something is wrong. Something is out of alignment. I was about to say wrong, but something is out of alignment in your schedule. Or if you commit to a big project and imposter syndrome comes up, then that's mirroring what's going on internally. It's not about the project. It's about either these external conditions or these internal conditions. And they're bridges because they build the life, the work, and the future that you want to be in. If you don't finish those projects, it's like a half-finished bridge. It doesn't get you there. You've invested in it, but you can't make that leap. And so I'm a pain in the ass coach a lot for my clients, no matter what times, because I'm like, we're not going to choose, we'll choose some warm-up projects, but at a certain point, we're going to go after this stuff that really matters. Because it turns out, if in our relationship, we can't figure out how to get this done together, one, it doesn't rarely happen, or does it happen? Very rarely has it. Anyways, very rarely happens. But this is why we want to spend, or this is what we want to spend our time, energy, and attention and money on. The stuff that really, really matters. So how about let's go after that? Because all of the challenges that are going to come up for you, we can either say, you know what, not ready for it. I'm just going to sort of back away from it. But the next time you choose something that matters, guess what? It's still going to be there. We have this belief that we're magically going to improve 2 years from now and be able to really cross that threshold 2 years from now. But the real thing is, Rob, we get there by pushing through the threshold, not in like the suffering, firewalk, make your life hell way, but just deciding that today I'm going to inch forward against this thing. Tomorrow I'm going to inch forward against this thing, until you realize that this thing that you thought was 6 feet deep was actually only about 6 inches deep. Right. And so, these are really important bridges. And I think that's where, when we start talking about marketing, especially for novice coaches, to do marketing well, you have to fundamentally believe that your expertise is worth buying.
Yes.
You have to fundamentally believe that the transformation you're promising is going to happen. And if you don't believe that, it's going to show up in very small and big ways in your marketing campaign. When it gets hard, it's going to be like, oh, what does it matter? Like, do they really? When it comes time to set your price points, it's going to show up. When it comes time to make a clear, achievable promise to someone about what they're going to get from it, you're going to back down from that. You're going to go into what many coaches will do, start talking process. Well, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do this. That's not what they're buying, folks. They're buying transformation. They're buying some future positive state that they want to be in. And if you don't speak to that, and you don't make a compelling pathway to who they want to be and what you're doing, you're going to struggle in your marketing, and you're going to struggle in your sales.
There's so many great things there, Charlie, that we could get stuck into. In fact, there's probably a number of podcasts just off the back of what you were just saying there that we could go very deep into. But firstly, you remind me there, actually, sometimes this is very much not about just the fear of failure, but also the fear of success, which I think in my own experience was in a blind spot. And I think that's also true for many other people, because you don't often hear them talk about things that would perhaps relate to the fear of success. Although people more openly seem to talk about things, about they're worried about getting it wrong or, making a mistake and that sort of thing, particularly in the context of marketing. But also what I really appreciate there is your concept of mirrors and bridges. And that all makes complete sense to me. So I'm curious now that you mentioned alignment there. So I think that I'd love to get into that a little bit more, and also pushing through the threshold and how we do that. And I think you sort of touched upon it in what you were saying there in terms of what we can do and how we can begin that journey, begin that process. But I'm curious from your experience, from all of your experience, how you embark on that with people. How do you realign with where you need to go? And how do you change your alignment, change your trajectory? How do you make that happen? You mentioned sort of letting go, but I know there's more to it than that.
Yeah, so actually where I most want to start with is not where they need to go, but where they want to go, where they dream to be.
Okay.
Right.
That's good.
And I know that's subtle, but I'm a coach and there's a lot of subtleties in coaching, right?
Yeah.
But the first thing that so many people will come to me, especially if they're looking for me for productivity or strategy execution or sort of business building help, is they'll come to me with this whole sort of list of shoulds. I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I need to do this. I need to do that. And, should is an interesting word for me because of the context in which it's used. Like, we don't, unless we're being tongue in cheek, we don't say like, hey man, like I should go eat some cheesecake right now. I really should do that. It doesn't make sense, right? We know the language that we say is I want to, right? I'm called to, or something like this is something that I'm going to do, right? We only use should when there's some typically external standard that we're using against ourselves, right? Or we're not really in alignment. We don't use should language on things that we want or dream to do. And so that's one of the first places I look at it. And so, in my check-ins and sort of my assessments, I sort of have them pull out their shoulds, but I also have them pull out their dreams and wants. Because it turns out some folks will come to me like, I need accountability. And I'm like, let's pause on the accountability thing first, right? Let's actually start with what you want, because we don't need accountability to eat cheesecake or ice cream. Like, we don't need an accountability buddy for that, right? Yeah. We only need that when there's just something that we are not aligned with, we're not pulled to, right? Now, That was actually one of the curiosities that led me to writing Start Finishing is like, look, this is why, like, Rob, until this year, 2022, there wasn't a post on Productive Flourishing about procrastination. Right? It's a productivity blog. Most people know it as that. Nothing about procrastination. And like, that's weird. Like, that was weird for a lot of people, right? But I'm like, it's not a curiosity to me about why people don't do what they don't want to do, right? They don't want to do it, right? There's no mystery there. What's really fascinating to me is why people don't do what they want to do, why people don't do what they dream to do. Now, that's interesting, right? And so that's what Start Finishing unpacks, right? Why don't we do that? So a lot of that is about, one, people not giving themselves permission to do that thing. It's about people not thinking that they deserve to do that thing or that they're worth that thing. It's about trying to define that thing in standard metrics of success, external success that sometimes doesn't work, right? It's trying to, this is generally not talking about coaches yet or marketing, but it's also trying to make this thing they really care about turn into a side hustle or economic container, and therefore corrupting the very thing, right? Like, oh, I'm a great gardener, so I'm going to start a gardening blog and have affiliate sales and do a podcast. No, just enjoy gardening. Like, it doesn't have to be a damn side hustle, right?
Yeah.
You can enjoy things just for enjoying them. And that's what trips people up, because that's the space that people want to allow them to do. Like, I'm doing a thing and it's enough that I enjoy doing the thing. Oh no, we have to make it productive. We have to make it like make money. We have to give it this other external thing. So much of our suffering comes from that. And when I say suffering, I'm using that in the spiritual Buddhist sense of it, or like pain is what happens to you, right? Suffering is the story you tell about it. Suffering is the narrative you layer on top of that. You can stub your toe and it hurt like hell. Your suffering will come when you start accusing yourself or your housemates for putting the damn thing in the way so you get your stubbed toe. You're like, no, you just stubbed your toe. It sucks. Move the damn thing, right? So I say that because when it comes to coaching and marketing and going that direction, one of the challenges that people have, and is that success condition that we don't talk about, is like, what happens when this thing I actually really enjoy doing becomes my day-to-day reality? Will I still enjoy it? Like, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't enjoy it as much as I thought I did. Or what if I get to do it, but then I'm not good at it? Or what if I get to do it, but then I have to give up family time? Or what if I get to do it and then I become a sellout that's just, scamming people? By the way, if you're new, you're probably not good enough at sales and marketing to scam people, so don't worry about that, right? And so we end up telling these sort of stories because one of the reasons is because we can't accept that being good at something, being well paid for something, and being in flow with something is enough. That's okay. So we have to have these sort of suffering riders on top of it. And then we end up in situations like that. So part of the alignment piece that you asked me about is like, what if we align to your dreams? What if we align to your mission? What if we align to your calling, if that resonates to you? And then what if we start debugging and calling out some of these riders that you're going to put on top of it? And just asking, is that true? Is it necessary that for you to be a successful coach, you have to be in disintegrity? Is it necessary that it's going to create harm in your relationships? Is it necessary that you're going to burn out? No. Can you think of other people who are doing it? Yeah. Well, if it's possible for them, it's possible for you. And so remember I said earlier, Rob, we have to start from a place that we're not uniquely defective. And here's where that comes in. That's why I start there, because people are like, well, yeah, that works for Pam, but Pam's amazing. It's not going to work for me because I got this thing that makes it not possible for me. Now, I want to be honest, like, that's not what people will say to you in the first round of the conversation. The reason we talk about failure so much is because it's socially acceptable to. It's easy to talk about failure. It's really, really hard to talk about that crippling vulnerability that you have. It's, one, hard to see it, but two, once you see it, like, that's hard to talk about. It's hard to find the people who you trust that can hold that space. It's hard to own it, right? It's hard to own that that's a piece of you. So we don't engage with that stuff. And we think we'll just sort of figure that out along the way. You probably won't, right? Well, you will, but it'll be the hard way. I'm not trying to sell coaching, right? But this is one of the value adds of coaches and therapists and, lines that can call it out and say, hey, have you noticed that thing? And you're like, I don't want to talk about the thing. It's like, well, let's talk about that then. So that's where to really get true alignment, we have to call some of these things forth and we have to make space for them. Now I'm going to pause here because there's been this, really, I'm not going to try to be overcritical. There has been this paradigm introduced in our culture that if you talk about a thing, you give it more power. That is not true, right? If you say, I have this pattern, I do this thing, or if I really want to say it, historically, I have done this. That's the most powerful thing we can say. It's true, but it doesn't own and define you going forward. Saying historically, this is how I've done this, does not make that historical pattern any more powerful, right?
Yeah.
In fact, it gets you to go into, the name it, claim it, tame it process. You could name that you got the thing, right? And give it a name. Sometimes funny names help out a lot here. But then you could start to tame it. And by tame it, I don't mean make it go away completely, right? Like when we talk about taming dogs, like we're not like taming it and then it goes away. It's like, no, we have learned to coexist with it in ways that are not destructive and that can be powerful. So if I know I've got that negative pattern and I claim it, I was like, you know what, but that doesn't have to own me. I know it's this thing driving my inaction. I can engage with that versus just ending up in a TikTok click hole and not knowing why.
Yeah, and I think you're talking there to what I know some of the more experienced coaches listening to this will recognize, particularly in the leadership space and the executive space, which is owning that vulnerability that you're talking about there. And I like the permission that you're giving us to explore that, look at it, don't be frightened of, in some way, taking responsibility of it. You remind me of that phrase, which goes something along the lines of all the problems we experience in business are a reflection of personal problems. And what I really liked about what you've called out there is that circumnavigating that vulnerability and that actually being the problem. So it's not so much the vulnerability, it's the fact that we choose not to go there that's actually creating the issue. To your earlier analogy of, it being 6 feet and 6 inches deep, but just facing it or just acknowledging it is going to be a start in the right direction there. I was just making some notes as you were talking there. I made quite a few notes actually, Charlie, and I wasn't expecting to go here, but somewhere I'd like to explore with you now is when you were talking there about our wants and our needs, but perhaps what really caught my attention was when you were talking about being pulled towards our dreams and our wants. And I'd love to hear you tell us more about how that can align with motivating us with our marketing in terms of coming back to the alignment that we were just talking about there and doing that sort of inner work. When we can get to a place that we go, actually, you know what, I am a good coach and I do coaching and and my clients tell me I am getting good results. That should give us the confidence. So if we have enough belief in ourselves that we're offering a good service out there, then really we're almost doing a disservice not to, in some shape or form, promote that or let other people that might be struggling out there in the world know that we exist. So I'd love for you to tell us more about how we can, I suppose, maybe define or redefine our dreams and our wants. How, what sort of tips and ideas do you have about sort of exploring that space in a powerful way? To your earlier point there, we can easily talk about failure, but sometimes that some of those other conversations, maybe success as well, are a harder conversation to have. What could we explore in that space in terms of enhancing our motivation towards marketing more effectively?
I'm going to creep into that conversation a little bit by just noting, y'all know that I'm a philosopher by training, so I just got to add this in there. Like almost all of the spiritual traditions say something along the lines of, if you have been given a gift, it is your job to share it, right? If you are a gifted coach, it's your job to share that. You don't keep that to yourself, right?
Yeah.
You're actually not receiving the gift, and different traditions have different words for that. But I just want to slide that in there. You don't have to be, you don't have to be religious or spiritual to get that, but it is a fundamental sort of human understanding that you're giving gifts to share. Right. And so that goes to the point of disservice. Now, I got to be careful with here because that can lead some people to go into an unhealthy martyrdom to where they're like, oh, I'm just going to go coach everybody and people can't afford it. And so then they burn themselves out because they're like, and there's also that tradition that like self-care for service. That's also baked into all these traditions too, but we just don't hear that one, especially in our Western culture. So I use dreams specifically because for many people, dreams are wants on steroids, right?
Yeah.
And they're much more comprehensive, but it's a pattern interrupt in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. One of the things, this is just based upon where we've been with the COVID and pandemic cycle, is it hasn't felt for many people that there's space to dream. Like, bro, we're just surviving. We're just trying to get toilet paper. We're just trying to like get our kids back and forth to non-school, right? Or we're just trying to get in. And so that's been and so I realized that depending upon where you are in that, and I was tone deaf in so many ways throughout the pandemic because I'm still like, y'all, this is going to be temporary. It sucks now.
Yeah.
But there is going to be life after this darkness. There's going to be light after this darkness. And so let's continue to dream, even if we have to defer some of those dreams. Let's not let that go, right? If you can't act on it now. But dreaming actually, speaking to that language, actually calls us to think about our life bigger, like, because it lets us to shake off some of those constraints, right? I know as the type of coaching that I do, and the type of coaching most people listening to do, the first time you start talking about wants and goals, there's always this underlying, but that can't work and this can't work. I'm like, no, we're just dreaming. We're just dreaming at this point, right? So let's build that. Let's at least imagine that possibility and put that down as a dream and own that we can dream something even if we may not be successful at achieving that, right? We don't have to limit our vision and our imagination just to the realm of what we think is our next adjacent possible, right? We are blessed, especially in the West, especially in America. Like most of us, health considerations, are different, but most of us are going to be able to contribute to the world until we're at least 85. 85, man. Yeah. Most of us are going to have 2 to 5 decades, Rob, of work that we can do. And I want us to take that long view and to say, okay, this is a long game. I'm going to be doing this, right, for a long time. So what is worth investing this one precious life that I have in, right? And granted, that might not come up in your August marketing campaign, but when you really take some time to really update those dreams and realize your first dreams are going to they're going to be too small, and that's okay. Right, because you see that there's more behind that. But when you really take it, like you got 2 to 5 decades, depending upon when you start coaching, to really use your gift to make the biggest difference that's resonant and aligned with who you are. What are you going to do with that? Right? And you don't have to figure it all out right now, but just having a North Star and having a through line is super helpful because then we can ask, okay, how does this quarter's projects start building a bridge towards that future? How does this year's project, so this marketing campaign, this August marketing campaign, it's about getting clients or offering your program. All that's great. Nothing absolutely wrong with that. And it's a smaller component of this thing that you're here to do, right? I think, if I get my say, when people listen to me about this with coaches, it's like those old McDonald's signs where it's like 99 million people served. I think it's just like, 100 people transformed. How many people are you going to transform, coach, whatever your language is around that, right? You are making someone better. You are in a behavior change, life improvement business, right? That's what we do, right? And when it becomes about that, then I think it gives us more alignment. It lets us navigate current setbacks because this one marketing campaign does not define your entire career, right? It's a moment. It's an event, not a character flaw, right?
Yep.
And so it just lets us do that.
Yeah.
And I want to acknowledge here, especially for women and people of color who are listening to this, that giving yourself space to dream and figuring out what that is a whole process in and of itself, right? Because you haven't been invited to do that. Just want to acknowledge that, right? So if that feels like, ooh, I don't know how to do that, it's okay. It's not that you're defective. It's just that this is a new realm. It's like if you've never learned calculus and you start walking into Cal 2, like, yeah, you wouldn't know how to do Cal 2, right? You've not been in the environments in which that's been a place that's been fostered. But it doesn't mean you can't start today, right? Doesn't mean like, and this is one of those things that I just have to remind people from just a performance side of things, like anything worth doing is worth doing badly in the beginning. And I say that because there are so many coaches who are leveraging their expertise and they're so used to being damn good at everything that when they walk into these areas that they're not good at, they're like, oh, I can't do that, or I'm not good at it. It's uncomfortable. Of course it's uncomfortable. You're not good at it. It's okay, right? What would you say if a client was like, oh, I don't want to do something, I'm not good at it? It's like, are we going to learn to get good at it? Or are we just going to decide we're not doing that? What are we doing here, right? And so I just want to invite coaches who may not be used to dreaming and making space for that, envisioning and thinking about what their life is going to be like in 3 to 5 years. That's an unfamiliar muscle. It's all good. You're not broken. You're not wrong. It's not that you're a poor visionary or strategic thinker. It's just we got to learn to start that. Because some of us do. Some of us are just damn lucky and stumble into that dream. And they're like, oh, this is great. I'm just doing this thing. But at a certain level, you have to start crafting it. And we don't want to wait until we're 55, 60, 65 because we don't have that many decades left at that time. Like, what if you got, 3, 5 decades of doing your best work, sharing your gift, making a difference in this world? Like, let's do more of that, please. Yeah.
There's a really nice call to action I heard in there, Charlie, which is that don't leave this to the last minute. Don't leave it to that last decade. Get on, deal with this tough stuff now. It might feel tough now, but hopefully you'll be looking back in a few decades' time going, that was worth it, because now look at the impact. You don't want that moment of regret further down the line where you're looking back going, gosh, I could have been so much more impactful if I had only known that it was going to be, maybe not quite as hard as I thought it was going to be to deal with this thing that's holding me back right now. So, yeah.
Yeah. What if it's not as hard as you think it is? What if this thing that has held you back is something you can really make significant progress on in the next 3 to 6 months?
That's a really nice thought. Yeah.
Yeah. How would that change things? And I also want to call out Rob, and in case listeners heard it, we've got an old man cat that apparently decided he wanted to start talking. So listener, if you're hearing them, that's P.D. Sorry about that. But one of the benefits of working from home.
Oh, that's cool. So, Charlie, you're insanely practical with this stuff. And what I love about listening to you, you have this wonderful way of being able to wrap up things from both a spiritual and a practical perspective, as well as throwing a load more in there too, which is just a wonderful experience to be part of. With the practicality, sort of the more practical side of things in mind, I'd love to get some practical tips from you in terms of productivity, in terms of not marketing tactics specifically, but maybe around the planning side of things. So this could probably apply to anyone listening to more than just their marketing. As a long-term follower, and I know Productive Flourishing now has been around for well over a decade, coming back to your sort of last point there, which is wonderful to see. And that's no coincidence. And so I'm curious as to what works well for you, what works well for those that you work with from a productivity and from a planning perspective. If our listeners been listening to our conversation so far today and they're going, right, okay, you've given me a number of fantastic things and you've reflected back to me a number of things that I could be working on here, perhaps in parallel, to help me really get moving with outreach and offering my services to more people. With all of that in mind, what could our listener be doing or begin to start doing today in terms of breaking this all down, making it practical, making it executable on a daily basis that has a really nice long-term trajectory?
I love this question. Would you like me to contextualize it for marketing specific or more general?
Well, I'll let you choose, Charlie, in terms of this series is obviously about marketing, and I imagine our listeners probably coming in from that angle, but I know you can probably offer some more gold that's going to lend itself to more than just the marketing. So maybe sort of 60 marketing, 40 everything else. How about that?
How about that? All right. So I'll start with the 40 just because it's going to give me a framework to build it on.
Perfect.
All right. So I'm going to give sort of two go-to frameworks that are really universal that help people, especially marketers and creative folks, right? So first is the 5 projects rule. And so the long way of talking about the 5 projects rule is no more than 5 active projects per time horizon. The time horizon is what does a lot of the work for us, right? So I'll start with there. Most of us know instinctively, like, what a week-sized project looks and feels like. We know what a month-sized project, feels like. We know that month-sized projects contain week-sized projects, right? We kind of get that, right? And so what I want to say is, like, for instance, we've been talking about your August marketing campaign. Well, for me, that's one of your 5 projects. Right, on top of that. So when you start thinking in terms of marketing, especially if you start thinking in terms of marketing campaigns, it's always going to be one of your 5 projects. And trust me, if you do not make it one of those 5 projects, you're not going to do well with it.
Right.
So a lot of times when I work with clients on that, not to go into too much framework there, but I'm like, we have to have certain months or certain number of month-sized projects allocated to marketing-related activities, whether it's a campaign or whether it's building some competencies, whether it's starting to use LinkedIn. So we might decide 3 months, we're just going to focus on learning and implementing in LinkedIn. Well, that's 1 quarter-sized project. You have 4 remaining.
Yeah.
Right. And people get super pissed about it. But when I'm always like, well, are you doing more than that to start with? And oh, by the way, 2 of those need to be life projects, because if you don't make projects out of life, then you end up all business and no life. So that's not good. So really, you get 3 when it comes to business. So one of them needs to be marketing, right? Typically, one of them is going to need to be some service-related thing, right? So if you market a program and you sell a group coaching program, guess what? You got to deliver that. That takes time, energy, and attention. Right? So 5 projects, but really try to think in terms of 3 active projects, active big rock projects. It's not talking about all the routines you do. Like, you don't need to put, like taking out your trash, like, or the business equivalent of that. You're just going to do that.
Yeah.
But it's going to take up one of those. So that's framework 1. Framework 2 is focus blocks. Focus blocks are, I talk a lot about time blocking. I can send you a link about this, Rob, but focus blocks are 90 to 120 minute blocks of time where you do that deep work or that focused work that drives it forward. Too few marketers, or coaches who are marketing, spend enough time in focus blocks, right? You can, instead of thinking like, I can do this in 20 minutes, which most of us are terrible at estimating minutes, right? We can think, oh, it takes me 2 focus blocks to come up with the social media copy that I'm going to need for marketing for the next 2 weeks. All right, we can put that in your schedule. We don't have to go into our normal hour time. We can just talk about blocks. And so what that allows us to do is to look at how many total focus blocks someone has and parse them out to say, hey, first off, you've got 0. So this marketing campaign is going to be really hard because you can't fuel it. Focus blocks fuel your strategic and best work. So marketing campaigns and doing marketing well requires those focus blocks. So we start piecing it together. All right. So now if I'm starting to go towards marketing, I've sort of talked about, how we might structure that at the high level. But at a certain point, it comes down to thinking of the marketing methods you're going to use. So I'm going to use email marketing. Okay. How many email marketing messages are you going to use? Well, you think it's a 5 to 7 point campaign. How long does it take you to come up with each one of those messages? Well, 3 to 4 focus blocks. Okay, that starts to chart out what work it's going to take to do and where they might program. All right, I'm going to use social media. Okay, how long does it take to do some of these pieces of creating that? Takes me 2 focus blocks to seed Twitter for 2 weeks. Okay, great. We know what that looks like. And you start to piece together these different building blocks of a marketing campaign with the actual focus blocks that you have to put them together. And you can make good choices like, oh, I wanted to do that, 7 point email marketing campaign that the digital marketer did. It was so cool. P.S. Digital marketer has a lot of copywriters and people doing this stuff, so it's easier for them to do than most working coaches.
Yeah.
Right. But it's like you see that you're not going to be able to do that. So maybe you do 3, but you focus on them really well.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you pull back and focus on doing it extremely well than trying to do the spray and pray marketing stuff, which doesn't work. It typically takes at least 2 or 3 focus blocks per month for someone to reflect on and analyze what's working in their marketing strategy, whether it's you're looking at analytics, whether it's looking at, social media stats, whatever it is. At a certain point, some guy like myself is going to say, "Hey, Rob, so what's working?" And you're like, "I don't know."
Yeah.
Well, how about let's figure that out? Let's start to figure that out so that we don't just keep doing stuff that's not working. Because there's a lot. Marketers have gotten really good at getting us to buy stuff we don't need. Right. Including social media methods, including marketing methods, including all sorts of things. And so if you're continuing to buy things that you don't need and trying to do things that don't work, not only are you wasting your money, you're wasting your time, and you're still not using your gift the best to go to your people. Right. And so I typically will come in and ask people to pick no more than 3 methods or channels and really focus on learning to do those well. So if you're working with people who are the LinkedIn crowd, learn to use LinkedIn. Maybe you don't need to be on Instagram, right? However, if all your people are on Instagram and that's really a thing, I don't know about coaches, like life coaches maybe, but a lot of the other coaches, I'm not sure about that one.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe you just ignore Instagram for business use. You can enjoy it. You can go there for your digital grazing, but you don't have to make it a business function for yourself. So pick 1 to 3 that you learn to get good at, that you learn works for you. And if that's enough, guess what? That's enough. You don't have to do more than that. But if it's not enough and it's not working, then maybe you drop one and do something else. But again, think in terms, when I start thinking in terms of these, I'm like, give yourself quarter-long stretches to work through some of these and commit to doing it for the quarter, not to commit to doing it like 3 to 5 times and then deciding it's not working and then moving to the next thing that you do, right? Most of the channels, most of the things you do, the first entry points are just, the first 10 are just you figuring out what you're doing. It's not going to work most of the time, right? By the time you get into that good groove and good rhythm, you can actually start to see the results. And so I think when it comes to marketing for coaches is because at a certain point, we're so used to the fast response that we get from sales initiations and sales calls. This is why I wanted to start there, right? Coaching, we get a lot of real-time positive feedback in what we do.
Right.
And that's great, except for when we need to commit to long-term projects and we don't get that instant feedback, right? And so when you've gotten good enough at selling and having great sales conversations with your clients or with your prospects, the prospect of spending 3 months working on this other stuff where you don't see anything and it's just random people online sometimes liking things or it's crickets, like you're going to bail on that. I get that. I'm a coach. I get that too, right? But you have to sort of commit to this for the quarter so that you can do a real reflection of what's working and not just whether the first, 3 to 5 things that you tried worked.
Yeah. That's great. So this is almost about like mini projects that are experiments that require focus time and some commitment. And I really like what you called us out on there because I am definitely of that sort of motivational style, which is where I prefer the immediate feedback. And so it's good to know that and have an awareness of that because at least we can say, well, if I know I'm not to expect immediate feedback for a period of time because this is what we're doing here, then you can kind of just get on with it and somewhat work with that. It may be that why we struggle with some of this stuff and the marketing side of things is because you need to almost experiment for long enough to get enough feedback and data to figure out what it is that's working, because then that will then feed into your motivation.
Yeah, I mean, I got to be careful because my results and when I came in may not be everyone's, but it happens for a lot of my clients. But for me personally, Rob, like I haven't actively been looking for clients since about 2012.
Yeah.
Right. Most people come to me like, hey, I read the book. I did the thing. I'm interested in working with you. I heard on the podcast. I heard all that sort of whatnot. So it makes my sales life a lot easier. Right. I haven't had to really work on that side of things. And we invest a lot in those things. Right. So I think about my marketing as hiring a salesperson.
Yeah.
Right. In the sense of they're doing a lot, the marketing is doing a lot of that for me so that by the time it comes to me, then we're having a conversation about fit and whether it's timing and things like that. I think when we think about it that way and we invest as if it were that, it at least opens up some space for people to do that. And it's really, we have to think when it comes to marketing from a coaching side, we have to think in terms of like seasons, like agriculture seasons, right? Like we plant one season, we harvest another, right? And if you haven't done that cycle, or if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, then what you'll find is about the time that you need those new clients or you need that cash, you're having to start your marketing all over again. It's one of those jumpstart last minute launches that are hella stressful, that often don't work because they're so infused with stress and last minuteism that it backfires on you. So I'm just hoping if especially on thinking intentionally and proactively and strategically about marketing, the real sell here that I'm hoping people will bite off on is if we do this in advance, we get out of that stressful marketing cycle where we just have to we got to go with clients and we need them 3 days from now. And oh God, what are we going to do in 3 days? Like, what if we can revert that so that there's a steady 3 to 5 leads coming in a week or whatever makes sense for your business, right? And you're just continually in discovery and sales calls. You're continually putting something out that's useful for people. And it doesn't have to be that damn hard. But to make it that way, you've got to invest in it. You got to plant those crops. And you got to do a little bit of that sowing, which is the hard part of planting, right? Before you can reap later on.
Yeah. And as you would with that, you would again experiment and work out how things are impacted by different conditions, what works for you, and what the right blend and mix is going to be. That's something that comes with the longer term. But coming back to your earlier point there, if we think about this in terms of decades, actually what we can achieve in the shorter term actually can be quite a lot with a bit of thought and a bit of planning and a bit of actually just getting this stuff down. So having some kind of strategy or plan around our ideas is the theme for me that's coming out of our conversation today. Charlie, very respectful of our time together here. I can't believe this last hour's flown. There's a couple of closing questions I'd love to ask you. I was just wondering, before I do that, would you like to just talk to us briefly? I know there's a wonderful post on your blog on productiveflourishing.com, and we'll put all the links in the show notes, by the way, for our listeners. So head on over to associationforcoaching.com, and if you find Charlie's episode there in the Make Time for Marketing series, all the links and resources that Charlie's mentioned, we'll have the links in there for you to be able to find all the good stuff. Before we wrap up, I'd love for you to just perhaps talk a little bit more about time, energy, and attention, because there's a really great post on Productive Flourishing about that, and the mix there in terms of how do we get a handle on that, because it's not just about time. This series is about making time for marketing, but you and I both know it's not just about time, is it?
No, it's that energy and attention piece. I sort of shortcutted this by talking about focus blocks. It gave me a way to get there really quickly. But a challenge that people have with time management in the way that it's traditionally understood is we assume that all units of time are equal, but they are not, right? If you're a morning person, you've got those power hours in the morning. If you're an afternoon person, you got them in the afternoon. So if you don't pay attention to things like that, it's going to end up such that you're planning to do work at the very worst time for you to do. Right. And so it's your limiting factor, which is why I jumped right into focus blocks, is typically the amount of that high energy powerhouse time that you have, that each of us have, different chronotypes, whether you're an early person, afternoon, late, in between, right? The goal is to align some of this marketing work and some of the strategic work for those times in which you're the most powerful. And that means coaches. That mean you might not be able to sell those hours in the middle of that. So you're going to have some compromises there, but I've seen far too many coaches sell their power hours to clients, but then have none left over for any of the work of their business, and they're not getting anywhere. And I was like, well, this is just a matter of alignment. You're choosing to take in the revenue now, but not to build the business later. So when we start thinking about time and energy, you really have to think about when are you at those power peaks of energy and attention, and how do you focus those on the things that matter most? So general rules there. Again, coaches, be super careful about how much of your power hour time you sell to clients. Something that I'll help coaches with on this one is to think about their client or their business as one of their clients. How would you treat your business if it were one of your clients?
Yeah.
And prioritize as such, and you'll start to see, wait a second, my business is growing. Well, of course, you know how to do some of this, or you at least know how to prioritize. What you feed grows. Feed your business a little more with those power hours. And to be clear here, I'm not talking about all the time, but if you're not getting 3 to 5 focus blocks per week on just the business parts of your business, you're probably not going to see growth unless you just have gotten into an ecosystem that people are just sending you work, which is great, or you've fallen into a theme that's super, super hot and people are just hungry for it right now. But when it comes to an off-cycle thing, or if your referral pool changes, or that thing's not as hot, you might find yourself struggling because you haven't fed your business enough. So not just about time, because we have 24 hours a day, right? I'm not going to do the Beyonce thing because she has a support staff, right? But honestly, most people, like most peak performing creative professionals, have at most 6 hours of that peak energy in them a day. And those are for people who have structured their life around that with good fuel, with schedules, with environments, all of those things. If they get 6, what are the rest of us doing? Right? Most of us have to learn to really use 1 or 2 really, really well. Yeah. So that's, as we start talking about clawing back time, if I really want to get there, I really love for coaches and really nudge coaches to start getting 2 focus blocks that they can use per day. Yeah. Between content, between working on their frameworks, between building their next product or program, between doing client assessments and sort of, that sort of reflection, marketing, sales, it takes time, right? And not to sell all of their coaching hours. Obviously, if you really, really need to cash flow and you're going through something in your life where that's the case, then great, do that. But just understand that's going to come at a cost to your business growth.
Yeah. And you will want to be trying to shift towards what it is that you're talking about there. And I know there's a really great resource on productiveflourishing.com. Perhaps you can point us towards that in terms of mapping our energy.
Yeah, so there are several things that you can get from Productive Flourishing. So the post that Rob is talking about is the one on heat mapping your productivity, which basically lets you figure out which your peak hours are. We have plenty of tools on the free planners page that help you figure out how many focus blocks you have, to create a weekly blueprint for yourself, to start to use some of the insights from the 5 projects rules. So if you head to productiveflourishing.com/free planners, you're going to stumble in on a lot of these because we've made a lot of these tools available, and they're free at this point. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to give me your email. They're just there because I want you using your gift as much as possible. And I hope that one of my gifts is helping you do that.
That's great. Well, thank you for that, Charlie. As I say, we'll put all the links in the show notes so our listener can find you there. It's been a fabulous conversation, Charlie. I mean, I've learned so much. I've made so many notes here in the time that we've had together today. I'm really, really grateful for your time. Just before we close, I just wondered, is there anything in the context of our conversation today that you would like to add, or any final thoughts for our listener?
I'm going to give a tool, and I'm going to give a last little shot in the mindset land. So a post I will recommend here, and Pam tells me that I need to say this more because she uses it all the time, is I have a post called Cash Flow Opportunity Visibility, which is a framework that helps you decide where you need to focus on in your business, right? Mm-hmm. And so do you need to build cash? Do you need to build opportunity? Do you need to build visibility? And it's super great for when you, as a coach or a business owner, you're sitting there, you're like, I'm not sure what matters most right now or what I really need to work on. Let you orient your projects around that. So if you need cash, there are certain projects you might do. If you need to build opportunities, there might be things. And this is a useful tool from that perspective. Where I'll end is just hoping to encourage you as a coach to own your medicine and your gift. Right? If you think you got it, people are buying it and they're getting helpful, like that has value. You'll notice throughout this whole thing, I appreciate you for doing this, Rob. Neither one of us have talked about your worth as a person. Mm-hmm. Your gift and your medicine is different than who you are as a person. So focus on the service and the transformation. Share it as much as possible. And when the head trash comes up, listen to your clients and listen to your partners, because they're righter than you are about the impact that you're making and that you matter, right? And so if you're hearing that from them and you're getting that positive feedback, trust them, because sometimes we carry shadows with us that can convince us otherwise.
That's wonderful, Charlie. Charlie, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much. It's been a blast, and look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. I'm Rob Lawrence. For 20 years, the AC's purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and societies worldwide. To find out more about the Association for Coaching and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our website at associationforcoaching.com. You can keep up to date with our latest podcast episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.